The U.S. Marshals Task Force says that man was held up in this beige apartment from 9:30 this morning to 11:30. Identified as 25-year-old Dacoby Reshard Wooten. Authorities say he was wanted for forcing his way into his ex-girlfriend's home on Monday, shooting and killing her.
On the cold morning of November 23, 2015, the sound of gunshots was heard in the area of Belle Glade, Florida, piercing through the silence of the early hours. Authorities were called to the scene, where they later found the lifeless body of 24-year-old Dacoby Bryant bleeding on the floor. A few feet away from her was her mother, Sharon, also bleeding from a gunshot wound, but miraculously still breathing. Both women were immediately taken to the hospital with the help of neighbors. Miraculously, Sharon came out alive and well, but Dacoby did not survive. Days later, in a SWAT standoff, the man suspected of committing the heinous acts on Dacoby and her mother was cornered at an apartment complex in Fort Pierce.
The U.S. Marshals Task Force says that man was held up in this beige apartment from 9:30 this morning to 11:30, and you can see where authorities actually shouted out the windows trying to get a better look at where he was.
And they told us to go inside because the guy in the front window have a gun.
The man was named Dacoby Wooten and was apparently the victim's boyfriend and father to their children. When they found him, he was still cradling the gun he used to commit the murder. It was utterly despicable. What could cause a father to shoot his own partner, especially in the presence of her mother? Would this wicked crime be enough to warrant him a death sentence, even in this day and age? The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office hastily responded to the call from concerned neighbors reporting shots fired at the Grand Lakes apartment complex in the 600th block of Belle Glade Drive. When they arrived at the scene, Dacoby Bryant was already lying bloodied on the floor. Witnesses reported that in the early morning, a man later identified as Dacoby Wooten had lurked in front of Dacoby's door with a loaded gun and furiously entered the house with a clear intention of shooting her. The victim's mother, Sharon, was present, pleading fearfully with him not to shoot. But Wooten did not stop. He fired twice at Dacoby in the back and even attempted to shoot Sharon, but thankfully missed. The couple had already experienced a rocky on and off relationship, with their children staying with Dacoby and her family most days. The final straw came in the days leading up to the murder, when Wooten repeatedly threatened her with messages intending to harm her. Sources stated that out of fear for her and her children's safety, Dacoby wanted nothing to do with Wooten anymore and ended her relationship with him. Igniting the fire that led to the catastrophic events of Wooten mercilessly gunning her down and fleeing the scene without remorse. In the year prior to the murder, Wooten had a tough time. According to his family, he was unable to keep a stable job, hopping from one to the next. Adding to his troubles, he had also experienced the death of a young family member.
A series of events that took place where they felt like it was okay to share their feelings with us and not be judged. So, but with Kobe, like I said, he was always looking for an opportunity to prove himself. And through that, his form of expression was through his play and asking questions and making sure that he's right there being competitive, with the other guys.
According to his father, despite his troubled mental and emotional state, Wooten still loved his kids and Dacoby. When Dacoby broke up with him and moved on to another relationship, this apparently triggered Wooten to commit the unthinkable act of murder. After the tragic events of the shooting, Wooten fled and hid for a few days at an acquaintance's house. Authorities handling the case revealed that they had acquired approval to use a phone tracking device to hurriedly find Wooten and make the arrest. Thankfully, he was located at an apartment on the corner of North 7th Street and Avenue I in Fort Pierce, Florida. The 25-year-old had apparently kept and barricaded himself inside the apartment with his gun ever since the shooting. Days later, at around 9:30 in the morning, police swarmed to this area in Fort Pierce, which led to a standoff. Thankfully, a few hours later, Wooten was finally arrested and taken into custody for the murder of his girlfriend and mother of his children.
Identified as 25-year-old Dacoby Reshard Wooten, authorities say he was wanted for forcing his way into his ex-girlfriend's home on Monday, shooting and killing her. He also attempted to kill her mother.
Further investigation has led authorities to unearth evidence that Wooten had actually posted on social media a series of threatening messages and images directed at Dacoby. It was even said that this was happening repeatedly, and with each time the message became more frightening. despite the victim telling him to stop. What's more is that years before, accounts of Wooten's crimes and misconduct have already been brought to the police's attention. In 2010, he was charged and found guilty of domestic battery still against Davnisha Bryant, who described in detail the abuse she suffered. The report recalled that the officer who handled the case came to the scene in Belle Glade in reference to a welfare check. There, he found Davnisha with bruises on her arm and under her eye, and scratches on her neck done by Wooten. The officer proceeded to charge Wooten, although Davnisha said at that time that she didn't want to prosecute. Then in early 2015, witnesses claimed that the couple were once at the cleaners, where they had a commotion in which Wooten threatened to kill her. He would later brush this off as just a joke. Then just months later, Wooten began sending her chilling messages, continuing in his threats to kill her. One of these messages said, "It's going to feel so good to hear you say no, Kobe. No, don't do it. I want you to show these messages to the police because I'm going to do it to you." And that's not a threat, it's a promise. After these non-stop threats and stalking from Wooten, Davnisha reported him to authorities and got a restraining order. Terrifyingly, just before it was served, Wooten gunned her down with 2 shots to the back. The prosecutor for the case, Terry Skiles, said that the victim knew what was coming, seeing as some of Wooten's other threatening messages for her included references to Stephen King's film The Shining and a horrific promise to make Davnisha beg for her life. The victim's mother, Sharon Bryant, after being nursed back to health, bravely stepped forward to testify against the father of her grandchildren. She recounted to terrible events that took place with tears. Mrs. Bryant recalled that after she literally begged Wooten to not shoot her daughter, he would not stop. Even as she yelled for help and for neighbors to call authorities, Wooten had already made up his mind. "I have to do it," Wooten said coldly, gun in hand. He proceeded to toy with them and taunted them for a few minutes, wanting to hear them beg for mercy before pulling the trigger. These cruel acts would later be essential in Wooten's case in convicting him for a possible death penalty, as these are essentially a form of torture. Public defender Carrie Holwout said that these threats were actually the suspect's way of saying, "I can't deal with not having you in my life. Disgusting." She continued to tell the court that Wooten grew up in a challenged community without his father in his life, and that he fell in love with Davnisha Bryant despite their flaws as a young couple.
It was rocky on and off, but you could see the love because they kept coming back, kept showing up, together.
And one of his also testified that Wooten was a very proud father who loved his kids dearly. Holwood also argued that Wooten was in a troubled emotional state during the time of the murder. He and Davnisha had broken up and she was moving on. He had no stable job. Another family member also defended him, saying Wooten was a positive influence in his life, who he looked up to in sports.
Yeah, behind Dacoby and big brother Robert. So I remember watching when he first started the running back, played corner, safety. I just remember watching him. He was just natural.
Wooten has since then been charged with first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, burglary with a firearm, and felony in possession of a firearm. While the cases were built up against him, Wooten was held in Palm Beach County Jail while he waited for his trial date. As said earlier, there were a lot of crucial things noted from the events that were significant enough to warrant the suspect a greater punishment than the usual jail time: the death penalty. Under the state law, in order for the death penalty to push through, there must be an unanimous recommendation from the jury. If not, then Wooten would instead get life imprisonment without a chance of release. Prosecutors have asked the jury to consider the death penalty as punishment due to the seriousness of Wooten's crimes and for them being too sickeningly heinous and cruel for someone to do. The defense, on the other hand, sought to spare him and get him a life sentence instead, since they had stuck with Wooten doing the murder as a crime of passion. And indeed, it would be the difference between premeditation and a crime of passion that would dictate the difference between a life and a death sentence for Wooten.
The question for you now is whether you will condemn.
4 years later, on October 24, 2019, The Bryant family were present during the designated trial for Wooten, where they wore purple shirts in memory of their beloved Davnisha. They sat down and listened to the evidence presented against Wooten, and whether or not he should be given the death penalty. The family were also given the chance to speak, saying in a statement, "As her life and dreams were cut short and her children's lives have been changed forever, our family still struggles." Davnisha's mother, Sharon Bryant, who has since been terrified for her life ever since her near-fatal encounter with Wooten, testified in court against him before Judge Cheryl Caracuso. Mrs. Bryant said that Wooten fatally shot Davnisha Bryant, the mother of his children, then attempted to kill her as well. She said to the jury that she had tried to push her daughter through the door to get her to safety, but Davnisha could not get away and was shot twice in the back. It was after this that Wooten then turned the gun to her. "That's when he said he was going to kill me too," she said. Mrs. Bryant then added that when Wooten pointed the gun at her and fired, she fell backward down the stairs of the apartment complex, and he ran down the other set of stairs out the back. She finished her statements while wiping tears from her eyes. Both Public Defender Holwote and the Assistant State Attorney Alethea McRoberts had asked Mrs. Bryant about the tumultuous relationship between Wooten and Davnisha, to which she affirmed that indeed, at the start of it all, it was a really rocky relationship.
It was rocky on and off, but you could see the love.
She confirms that Wooten had sent death threats to her daughter and even to their family. Some of these text messages said that he was watching them. Although the couple had tried to work it out and continue to live together as a family and for their children, it was no use. Davnisha had confided in her mother that she was done with Wooten. She said she didn't want to go back with him because of the domestic violence, because he would constantly beat on her, said Mrs. Bryant. Prosecutor Alethea McRoberts had also cited aggravating factors that warranted the death penalty for Wooten. They argued that the suspect's actions were premeditated and that he had been clearly threatening to hurt her for months. They also considered the taunting he had done on both the victim and her mother to be crucially significant, having them beg for their lives and still going through with the killing. This was considered to be torture. At some point during the trial, Wooten, who was now 29 years old, had looked in the direction his victim Davnisha Bryant's family and raised a middle finger at them. And he had done this even after explicitly admitting to the court to Davnisha's murder, of which he still defends that it was merely a crime of passion. Then finally, on October 25, 2019, Dacoby Wooten was sentenced to life in prison for the first-degree murder of his girlfriend, Davnisha Bryant, and for the shooting and attempted murder of Sharon Bryant in Belle Glade in 2015. Wooten's case is the second death penalty trial in Palm Beach County this year. The first one was Christopher Versata in 2017 for the Jupiter triple murders. The last person to be sentenced to death in Palm Beach County was John J. Chamberlain in 2002, but was later sentenced to life in prison.